say a few thank yous to Ether Live, who have been doing the stream for us today. They're broadcasting all of this over the internet, warts and all. And also to ID&C, who provided our wonderful little laminates here that aren't laminated because it's green. On the back of here, I did mention this earlier, but if you scan this, you can get not only the power guide, but also a whole bunch of other documents and various downloads from that you might find of interest. And also I wanted to thank Lettuce Flowers, who sent us these living flowers for our table arrangements, and they said that they're also available for Mother's Day, which is on Sunday, in case anyone's forgotten. Should be getting paid for this, actually. And finally, Etherlight. I congratulated the wrong sponsor. Eventbrite. Eventbrite have kindly sponsored this event, so we're really grateful to Eventbrite. And you can find out more information about them on our downloads as well, so please do click onto that. If you haven't got the app to do that, you can also get that from the website as well. Okay, so we're going to make a start now with the panel for waste management. These are our waste experts. So I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, starting with James.
Okay, I'm James, Operations Manager at Why Not Festival and Truck Festival. Just taking another one called Brown Stock in a partnership sort of form. And unfortunately, waste management comes under operations, so I deal with that in fair detail, and it's quite an integral part of the festival. So I thought there was quite a lot of effort into it, basically. So that's that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Karen. Thanks very much to the AGF for inviting me here today. My name's Ed Cook. I'm a waste management consultant that specialises in the events industry. I recently ran Network Recycling, which delivered recycling services to events and festivals since the early 90s. Back then, recycling was rather a new concept, but nowadays sustainability is something that everyone's talking about, and it's really good to see more and more people attending events like this as the years go by. So I was a contractor for 10 years, and now my job is to help event organisers to find sustainable solutions to their waste management problems. And I also continue to practically manage a number of waste operations at festivals on the ground.
And Holger?
My name is Holger Schmidt. I work for a couple of institutions, international networks, for example, and I used to be a festival promoter myself, so I'm not actually a waste expert as you are, but I know quite a lot what festivals are doing and what we did. We had an admission-free festival in Germany with, it's a one-day event, 160,000 people within 12 hours in and out, so this was a very special experience.
Hello, I'm Marek Gordon. I'm a director of CETA UK, which is one of the larger UK waste management companies, and I've been with them for 22 years, and I'm going to start this session off, I think, with a presentation about our experience at the Olympics. So I'll stand for this if I may. CETA UK was the chosen waste management contractor for the Olympics. It was the only company that had a single contract for all services at all venues. There were several cleaning companies, many catering companies, but waste management was given to one company. And we thought it would be handy to run through some of the experiences we had at the Olympics. Obviously, it's a huge event. Some of these things would be directly related to festivals, some less directly related, but there was a lot of experimentation went on for the Olympic Games in waste management, and a lot of it has value for all of us, I think. So I'll quickly run through the vision, how we planned and delivered it, and then share the experience, what we think about it. What was interesting about the Olympics in terms of waste management is right from the very beginning, waste management was high in people's thinking. And that's, in our experience, unusual. It was so that the whole games were to be as sustainable as possible. But right from the very start, waste management was considered as a key activity which needed to be managed appropriately. We had a number of key targets. We were not allowed to send any waste directly to landfill in accordance with our contract. The recycling and composting rate should be about 70%. Now that target was given to caterers and to cleaners and the waste management company. It wasn't just the waste management company. We were to have no environmental incidents. It's all very well doing good things with waste, but if you do it badly, that's not so good. And we were to have 0 health and safety incidents, clearly as well. If we hurt somebody doing this stuff, it's no good. Some very few statistics. 37 competition venues. We all just watch the Olympics. We have a view on where those are. I mean, we recognise the names now. But in addition to those, there are 44 non-competition venues. So 81 venues in total. And the non-competition venues for training facilities, lots and lots of training facilities around London. There were bus depots and fleet depots and hotels and all sorts of things where we had to handle waste management to the same level at every single venue. In terms of sport, perhaps the most relevant there is 30 days of competition. Whilst there was work before and after the games, the concentration of effort I'll show you in a minute was on the competition days. And there were lots and lots of people coming to the games. 11 million spectators, 125,000 contractors, 75,000 volunteers, and so on and so forth. Lots of people there for many hours, for many days. I'll just quickly acknowledge that whilst we were the principal waste management contractor, where existing venues had sitting contractors, we were encouraged to subcontract to them. So in Glasgow, Glasgow City Council did Hampden Park for us, Viridor did Old Trafford, Bifford did Millennium Stadium, Grundon did Wimbledon, and Veolia did Wembley Stadium. So those outer London venues tended to be done, not all of them, tended to be done by subcontractors. A key part of our planning around for the London waste, and of course London represented something like 95% of all the waste arisings. So we have some facilities in Barking, 20 minutes from the Olympic Park, and this was the key to much of our achievement. We had a material recycling facility and where we developed our ops centre in Barking Road. Very little further up the road we have a transfer station and a logistics park where we parked all of our trucks. So that was very compact and very close to the stadium, the main stadium. Not necessarily close to the further afield facilities, but for the main arisings we were quite close. All the London generated recyclables were taken to our material recycling facility at Murph, at Barking I should say, where we sorted them, sold them on. And when we sorted them, plastic bottles went to eco-composting at a Coca-Cola plant in Lincolnshire in a food-grade plastics recycling plant. All the fibres, the cardboard, the papers and all the other fibres were sent to UK mills for recycling. Mixed polymers, lots of mixed polymers, lots of plastic bags and shopping bags and so on. We haven't actually recycled those yet, but we're just holding them in storage because we're building a plastics to diesel plant. So all this plastics, the plastics which are hard to recycle, we are shortly to be commissioning a plant in Avonmouth where we'll be creating diesel out of those unusable plastics. And all the other materials that we collected all went to UK processors. We were not permitted, well we were permitted, but we were discouraged from exporting materials, and we, with the exception of a tiny bit of wood in a very short period, we did succeed in that and did it in the UK. The compostables we collected, we took to a Barking transfer station where we did an initial sort. To send this material for composting, we had a 2% contamination limit, so we had to take contaminants out before we sent it to the composter. And we used a company called Country Style in Kent for the composting. Residual waste, we took a look at the residual waste shortly after we started, and we decided there are too many recyclables in this just to be throwing it away. So we took all of that to the Barking Material Recycling Facility and sorted through the residual waste as well and took out lots of valuable recyclables. Horse waste, the Greenwich Park equestrian events, and the police horses at Olympic Park, they went off for directly composting, and we used wood for horse bedding and other useful things. In terms of activity profile, that represents our activity for everything. The peaks for the Olympics and the Paralympics, 19 days of the Paralympics and 12 days for the 19 days for the Olympics, 12 days for the Paralympics. The maximum number of people, maximum number of trucks, and maximum number of containers, everything was concentrated into those two periods. Before we started the games, we had a month, what we call bump-in, where the caterers and the retailers were bringing in and stocking up everything. That all arrived rather late, but never mind. And then we had a period of transition where a lot of Olympic venues were being converted into Paralympic venues, and some Olympic venues were being decommissioned. And then afterwards, it was about a month before we actually finished for the decommissioning period. Key challenges, well, first of all, we had to estimate how much waste was going to be produced, and there were no records. Nobody had ever bothered telling anybody else in the Olympics what happens with waste. Certainly if you tried to get statistics out of Beijing, you were on a sticky wicket. So we had to estimate, and we hung our hats on this 61.5 grams per person per hour. So if you're a spectator, an official, an athlete, anything, anybody, a member of the press, we assessed that you'd be generating 61.5 grams of material per hour that you're there. And that's fine, but what we didn't really know, or we were able to estimate, is how much of that would be recyclables, how much would be compostables, how much would be residual waste. So we had to estimate all that as well. And then the number of people and how long they would be there. So we knew how many tickets had been sold, we knew how many overall people there would be, but we didn't know how long they would hang around. So if you had tickets for the athletics, for example, for the morning session, were you going to go home directly after that, or were you going to hang around in a big park for 6 or 7 hours generating waste? So those assessments were very, very difficult to make. I can just say, because it all went rather well, we got it right, but it was a very worrying thing because we just didn't have background information. One of the biggest challenges for us was the security system. We had to plan every truck and every driver and tell the security people a month in advance of the games who was going to be arriving with which truck at exactly what time. And if he arrived late, he was turned away. If it was the wrong driver, he was turned away. If it was the wrong truck, he was turned away. So planning that was just a ginormous exercise. Waste management, and this is key to festival management. Waste management is generally a local service, using local organisations, whether big companies in the local depot or smaller companies. For this, we couldn't do this locally. We didn't have enough drivers and trucks locally. So we had to draw drivers from around the country. We took our 100 best drivers to provide the service. But that meant we had to replace them in their local depots, we had to train them, we had to accommodate them and so on, and that's unusual for a waste company. Similarly, we had to provide a very large fleet for a very short-term contract. And what we did there was we have a fleet renewal process for 2012. We bought the new trucks for renewal, but we didn't give them to the business. We held them on for the Olympics, did the Olympics, then we sent them out to the business. Dedicating the material recycling facility, so the Olympics had exclusive use of that facility, but that meant, of course, that we had to divert our customers and make sure they came back afterwards. Reaction to changed circumstances, best planning in the world. Everything changed every single day. It was great fun. We had to mobilise effectively all 81 venues pretty much on the same day. And waste management mobilisation for a single venue is a bit of a challenge. 81 on the same day is a really big challenge. Very small waste compounds, I'll refer to this later on. People forget about how important the waste compound is. Lots of people milling around. Our reporting was intense. We had to report every single movement of every single tonne of waste into our facilities and out of our facilities, where it went and what happened to it when it arrived there, how much waste was generated in every part of that process. So our reporting for any waste management process here was very accurate indeed, and slightly unusual for our industry, I suspect. We were challenged with something we hadn't really very much prepared for. We were challenged to find homes for a whole host of reuse materials. I'll throw up a slide just as an example in a moment. We had to have a backup arrangement for everything. Transfer station could burn down, drivers could go sick, managers could collapse under the strain. Whatever it was, we had to have a backup for absolutely every eventuality. I've already mentioned the detailed tracking, and the worst of this was that we had no opportunity to practice. The Olympics are starting, you're starting, off you go. And that was a challenge in itself, I assure you. So the chosen system, Lowcoke, our customer, chose a 3-bin system for front of house, for recyclables, for compostables, and for residual waste or non-recyclables. Coloured lids, coloured labels, and the inside of the bins, there were see-through bins, and they had tinted liners, which were pretty much see-through as well, so you could actually see what was in the bin. That was quite useful for the punters, because if they were about to throw something in a bin, they could see what's already in there. And that was not a bad process at all. The bins also had labelling to help to say whether it's recyclable or compostable. These are examples of the labels. But what Locog did quite bravely, I think, was to attach little coloured logos to every piece of food packaging and every drinks package, or pretty much every. And so that everything you had, if you bought something from a shop, you had a little coloured label to tell you where to throw the thing in the bin afterwards. At the back of house, which is actually the more difficult end of waste management, they also operated the same three-colour system, recycling, compostables and residual, but in addition at back of house we had paper streams. And you can imagine there's quite a lot of paper emerging from the Olympics, from the press media, from the media centres, etc. Confidential paper, glass, clinical, hazardous waste and cooking oil were all separate streams. These are, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but these are some of the unusual things that were thrown at us to go and find a reuse home. And whilst you're just running through those on the screen, the answer to reuse is you've just got to present it in a good reuse condition. If you throw your reusable materials into a bin, mix it up with other things, or you allow them to get very dirty, they can't be reused. But if you present things, banners and flags and artificial grass, if they're presented to the waste management company in a pretty good condition, we'll find a reuse home. And this was something which changed our company and our approach to reuse during the Olympics. We did find ourselves able to find lots of reuse homes, which was something now that we've adopted, and one of our first starting points when we're looking at waste now is the reuse before we recycle. Let's look at some of the outcomes, and we'll look at the most important outputs first. So the number of health and safety incidents at venues, 0. These were very tight spaces we're working in with very big trucks, with thousands and thousands of people around, and to have had no health and safety incident is a true achievement, I think. How many environmental incidents? Also 0. We did well. The number of collection defaults, any contractual defaults? 0. I'm sorry to be showing off, but we're very proud of this. And did we send waste to landfill? No, we didn't. And are we proud of that? Bloody right, we're proud of all that. So just summarising, these are grouping together the different types of materials we collected into different use type groups, different recycled things, and even, you know, there are many, many items in each type of group here, in each group. So there are hundreds and hundreds of materials, but we brought them together to demonstrate how, you know, I'm sure you can't read that from here, but you can see the different groupings to find homes, recycling homes. And this was an important part of the analysis afterwards. We collected, in those 30 days of competition, we collected 9,000 tonnes. Doesn't seem much. Well, that's probably, if you annualise that, that's the size of a decent local authority annual type waste generation. You can see in terms of composting and recyclables, we collected something like 80% of that mix. But by the time we had processed it, that dropped to about 60%. And the reason for the drop was the recyclables were contaminated, the compostables were contaminated. We did our very best to remove contamination, but if you, for example, contaminate cardboard or papers with food waste, it becomes smelly, the mills don't want it. If you've got plastics in the compostable stream, the composter doesn't want it. And so, you know, the contamination has a significant effect. But notwithstanding that, 60% recycling for all the Olympics waste is pretty impressive. So let's just share our experiences with you, some of the thoughts that we've had. We give due praise to Locog, who were very brave in some of the approaches they made here. The 3-bin system was part of it, but also their procurement system, making sure that there were a limited number of types of materials on site, was very important. They had all sorts of unique communications materials, the things on the bins, on your tickets, on everything. There was lots of waste management communications. Many of those have never been attempted before. And we've got a number of learnings now for the event industry, which RAP has been producing an event industry document for waste management. It's just been published, I think this week, was it published?
Yeah.
So,
Which has lots of these learnings in there. The waste compound for successful waste management of a complex event is critical. You have to give it due space. We have to be able to do our work in a waste management compound to make sure that we can separate the materials appropriately. It must be of a suitable size and of a suitable design, and it must be thought about early. Our experience in waste management, everywhere we go, is architects and designers just forget about it until it's very late and it's like, oh yeah, we've got to find some space. And that was similarly true at the Olympics. And we say, because of our experience, and LOCOG have been saying the same thing as well, the waste compound should be managed by a waste company. In the Olympics, the waste compounds were managed by cleaning companies, which in theory is okay, but actually to say, no, I don't want that in that bin, please, take it away, is quite an important decision to make. You're disrupting people's work, but you're protecting the quality of the recyclables by not allowing contamination to arrive. And we think the waste company has more interest in that perhaps than the cleaning companies. What LOCOG did, very importantly, and is critical really to successful recycling, it limited the number of different types of packaging. So if it was going to be plastic bottles, they had to be PET plastic bottles. You couldn't have, all the caterers and all the caterers had to follow the rules. And that was a brave move because somebody like McDonald's, who are the sponsor, a huge sponsor of the Olympics, perhaps didn't really want to go along with that. The LOCOG were determined, and McDonald's changed all their packaging as well to fit this compostable, recyclable scheme, as did all of the caterers and the retailers. One of the things that we're not so sure about, having been through this process, is to use all compostable packaging around food. So that was the system that was adopted by LOCOG. So if you have, whatever it is you bought in terms of food, the packaging around it was compostable. And what we would say to that is there are issues with that. First of all, the composting market, isn't quite ready to handle such huge proportions of packaging in their composting processes. We did find a company, Country Style, and they did a good job for us, but they also didn't like this proportion of packaging. The fact of the matter is, if you buy a burger and it costs you 8 quid or 10 quid or whatever it was, you're going to eat it, and you're going to leave the packaging. So the food packaging proportions were wrong for composters. And beyond that, we just firmly believe that the experience that people have at home should be something they recognise. So you've eaten that burger in that burger box, you've got a piece of cardboard in your hand. At home, you would naturally put that in the recycling, in the paper recycling. Whereas at the Olympics, that was a compostable product. You need to put it in a compostable bin. And that, I think, the public found quite difficult. The colour coding on the packaging I referred to, excellent idea. It must be prominent. And if it's not that prominent, it must be, people should be aware of it through wide communications. It would be great, wouldn't it, if the event industry just adopted a similar style throughout the industry. And if you're going to have colour coding on packaging, it has to be on all packaging and not 83% of the packaging, as we discovered. The front of house bins and the signage that was used, some of these things sound critical. They're not intended to be critical, they're just using the learnings we've had because it was an extraordinary exercise undertaken. So the 3-colour bin system we think worked very well. It was something which the public readily adopted. It was something the back of house pretty much adopted. The clear bins with coloured lids and the tinted liners all added to this process of colour coding and getting used to the idea. Signage, however, has to be seriously unambiguous. If you look at the 2 signs here for recycling and for composting, there are in fact 4 different beakers and no signs. And it's not easy for a member of the public who's thinking about what to do with his cup to actually study that carefully and say, oh yeah, no, that's a see-through one, that's plastic, I'll put it in the recycling. So the ambiguity can't be allowed to emerge in the packaging labels. The back of house system, we believe, should be separate from front of house. One of the keys to this process was that if we identified contamination in a large container, we immediately try to identify where it came from and send the message back there's contamination coming from that catering facility or from that front of house facility and so on. And that communication was important to reduce the amount of contamination. But it would be much easier if, in fact, back of house had separate bins to put their materials in, completely separate at the waste compound, so that we could see more clearly where the contamination arose. And for caterers, if you're going to go down any path like this, caterers have to be trained. They have to accept the concept of training. Similarly with cleaners, we all know that caterers and cleaners use lots of temporary staff, and that is an issue. When they are in a very high pressured environment, their job is to get the food out, their job is to get the cleaning done, and we recognise that. But if you want a successful recycling system, the people operating cleaning and catering must be trained to recognise that it's important to do it. And just at the end there, if you've got unused catering food, this was a bit of a surprise to us how much unused food was thrown away at the Olympics. That it comes in a different type of packaging. And for this system to work, for example, you have to separate the food from the packaging before you put it in the bin. And caterers and cleaners need to be aware that that has to happen. So whatever system you adopted for unused food, it must follow the same system. And that's about 10 minutes, I think. Just overall, it was just fabulous. The whole thing was just so much fun. It was intense, it was really hard, we lost a few people through stress and all that sort of thing. But it was just But it was just a tremendous experience, just working with Lowpol, this great big machine who had never done anything like this before, just moved forwards and delivered on a fantastic Olympic Games, as we know. And we were just thrilled to be a part of that. Thank you very much.
Well done. Project, so hats off for having survived and actually come out smiling on the other end. Very impressive. I'm going to just stay on the subject of source separation at the moment, because I know that that's been a big issue over the years for festivals, with separate bins on site and contamination of the waste stream. So starting with Holger, what's been your experience on your events of trying to separate on site?
As I just said, it was a very special experience because there were a six-figure number of punters coming in within 2 or 3 hours to stay at the festival. And while it slowly filled, the field was slowly filled, the selection by the people worked, and as soon as they got 1 or 2 beers and got more and more, they started using it. They started throwing it in one of the bins that was closest, or whatever. If they have 3 next to each other, they throw it just in one day.
And was there a process following that for you to be able to separate it back out further, or how did you deal with the waste once it had gone through that initial collection, or was that down to the waste company?
The waste got post-separated anyway by our contractor, and then the recycling went to recycling, and the residual went to waste energy plant.
And do you know what the kind of figures are for those events in general, what or for your events in particular, how much actually manages to get diverted from landfill?
The research we did was actually 4 years ago. I don't know exactly the percentage.
Okay.
That it was, what we learned from there is, I think everything is about visibility, easy access, good communication, that people see, just like you said, color on the packaging, color of the bin, easy understandable through it in. So it's service, and in the end they will use it, and visibility that if you go there and see there's the 3 bins, then go there.
I mean, the colour coding is an interesting one, because it's been highlighted that we don't use a standard set of colours like you did at the Olympics, for example. And Ed, what's your experience been, because you've been doing for 15 years trying to do source separation?
Yeah.
Have you seen that different festivals use lots of different systems, and have you found that some are more effective?
Well, we've been providing the systems,
Right.
and they've actually been very successful. Typically, we would provide a 4 or a 6 bin system, and this ranges right up to events the size of Glastonbury. And to be honest, the segregation's been pretty good. And I think that one of the problems we're seeing at the moment is these 2 bin systems where you have one bin for residual waste and you have 1 bin for all of the recyclables. And the recyclable bin says recyclables on it, and then it maybe has a long list of all the different things that you can put in that bin. Now, you really don't have very long to communicate with one of your visitors, and they're probably not in the frame of mind where they're thinking about waste at the time. And what we found is that, but what we found is providing very simple messages to people, and a lot of people talk about the 2 bin system being a much simpler thing for people to get their heads around, but actually I think it's simpler to say have 4 or 6 bins which contain the signals which relate to the waste streams that people have. So if you want to collect cans from people, you just write cans on it, and you put a hole that's the size of a can on the top. I've seen all sorts of different signage which says, you know, all other metals and things like that, and you think, well, what metals? You know, it's cans we're collecting, it's plastic bottles we're collecting, it's paper plates and cups we're collecting. So I think it's all about targeting the signage properly, and also providing correct aperture. So, you know, having small holes for people to put their waste in, as opposed to just simply flipping the lid on an 1100 litre bin.
Some of the
Sorry, is there a national colour system in the UK?
Yes, there is. Yeah, it's called Recycle Now. It's part of the government's Waste Resources Action Programme. You can see it. Pretty much every local authority in this country uses the same system. And you will find that a lot of waste management contractors at events do use the same system, although, funnily enough, the Olympics took a slightly different take on it. So actually that was slightly the odd one out.
And do you find that there's one of the issues to having separate bins that some festival organisers have said is one of it is the footprint of the bins. They don't want to have a large footprint.
Yeah.
And secondly is the type of audience, because in some places they actually try and keep as many things that could be knocked over and tipped upside down and set on fire away from the audience as possible. So have you had to deal with events like that, and how can those festivals try and manage their waste stream in the face of such?
Sure, indeed. I mean, the footprint of 2 1100 litre bins is not very different to the footprint of 4 small 240 litre bins or 6 240 litre bins. So footprint-wise, not much of an issue. Same thing if you happen to be using oil drums. Very similar footprint. People will always find ways to set fire to rubbish bins. And yes, there is an issue with using plastic bins at some of the bigger events with the younger audiences.
What have your experiences been? With
there has been quite a few. I was going to say, we had chatted about doing the waste in 2011, and if he probably had done the waste at Why Not Festival, we might have lost a few bins basically. But so basically we did actually do a segregation system from about 2009, where we actually bought we didn't buy, we sort of begged for about 250 plastic blue barrels, 205 litre ones, and went about painting them all 6 different colours. And you know, from our point of view, it was like, this is great. You know, how can anyone not put the stuff in the right bin? But yeah, as soon as there's a few drinks, it gets a bit messy, and as soon as the wrong stuff starts to go in the bin, then it just becomes a free for all when everything goes in wrong, basically. So we did that, and it worked in the daytime. It worked, but evening time it was a no-go basically, and it was just pointless. But we also had clear bags. We had like a framework system where we put clear plastic bags. So if someone started to put the right stuff in there, like a bunch of cans, it seemed to follow on and work quite well. But we've scrapped all that now, so we don't get involved with it basically. So
I know that Sunrise Festival, who are based in Somerset, they had a psychological waste management plan. which didn't mean it's just imaginary. They when people were asleep, they went through to all the bins which were see-through and resorted it all and put it back in the bin so it looked like the bins had been used, and then people started to follow suit and actually put the waste in the right bin. So it was quite an interesting experiment.
It's giving an example is has always been a good thing at the German festivals too. So some festivals have like Waste Angels or however you call them, and show how it's done, and people follow them. On the other hand, there are people who say, oh, they're Waste Angels, throw it at the floor and they can take it and select it.
And have you found, do you need a lot of manpower to manage your 6 different bins, and does it make the collections more difficult with vehicle movements on site?
There is increased manpower, but if you're doing recycling on any kind of level, you do need separate trucks to put the material in. I mean, there are some fancy split-ended trucks, but generally you're looking at putting extra vehicles in. It's extra infrastructure, so there are associated costs with it. And interested, just to digress a little bit on the cost issue, we both attended an event on Tuesday, and there was lots of talk at that event about all these cost savings that you can get through doing recycling at your festival. Unfortunately, that's not my experience. I'm just not able to do the maths. I mean, we're looking at, if you're source segregating materials with litter pickers, you're looking at typically about 10 to 20% more labour going into the operation. If you're providing separate recycling bins, you've got to truck them all in, you've got to move them in, you've got to set them up, it's more complicated. You need to provide trader engagement, it costs more. And I think it's misleading to sell this issue to event organisers on the basis of cost. They really need to be dedicated to doing the right thing and furthering the cause of sustainability.
Okay. That brings me on actually to a point about the options with the waste inputs rather than the outputs. So a lot of events have been using reusable cups, for example, or completely banning bottled water altogether and using refillable bottles. And that is where people, organisers have found reductions in the cost due to the amount of waste that's being sorted and taken off site, regardless of whether it's recyclable or to landfill. So have any of you had experience of reusables on sites, and is there a difference in your mind as to how sustainable either option is for organisers?
In Germany, almost every festival uses reusable cups with deposit systems, and it's the communities, the city governments ask for it already in the venue contracts. And when we started it in '92, the deposit system weren't compostable cups. Then we had plastic cups, and they were collected and then made to park benches or whatever. And when we started that, it was a huge change, because before the venue had a silvery shine after the event, and then it was just green, because we were able to see the grass, and then afterwards everybody took over, and now it's the standard.
Yeah.
But it's no cutlery and no forks and etc.
Do you use reusable cutlery as well on your events?
And don't know of a festival in Germany.
No, I think it's similar.
There's because it's stained in a different way, maybe.
You see, the Olympics, the cutlery was compostable.
Okay. And how did you find the contamination situation? Like how can you manage the audiences? I suppose it's through communication, but to make sure that they are getting that into the correct stream and not contaminating.
It is about signage and communications, of course it is. I just think you have to look at the whole process from beginning to end. So if you have a segregated process at the front end, you're still going to need mechanical separation at the back end. You know, it's not going to be pure enough to get the best value out of these materials. And whilst I acknowledge your point about the cost, there is an issue of cost to be considering now. Waste management has been turned on its head. A lot of the products that will come out of events are valuable. Plastics, you know, we could get 200, 250, perhaps even more pounds per tonne for plastics. That's quite a lot of money. Papers are clearly have significant value. And if you're organising an event, you should be looking to your waste contractor to give you some money back. You're not going to recover the cost, for sure. You're not going to recover the cost of waste management out of the rebates that you might earn out of the contractor, but you will reduce your costs. And once you're on that path to reduce costs, then your encouragement to get better quality materials, more segregated, is enhanced. You want to do better than that because you know you're going to get more money back out of that process. So it's a very important part of waste management now is there's a switch in value, where we used to just send it off to incineration or send it off to landfill. Those costs are so high now, you can do lots of other things instead. You won't recover your costs.
Yeah, I mean, Marek's made a really interesting point there because he's quite right. These materials are worth money. Unfortunately, the waste management companies are not giving us any money back from the materials that we provide.
Have you asked?
Yes.
Well,
and they don't. In fact, they charge. In fact, I have dealt with CETA in many parts of the country. We're not getting payback for these materials at the moment. In fact, in some places, you know, we're being charged for them, and that really does need to change.
I think from the festival's point of view, or the organiser's point of view, we used to do a deal. I won't mention the names, but the local suppliers basically. We do the nice discount rate for the recycle skip because they've still got the haulage cost of getting it there and everything, and then that'd also affect the mixed waste price of skip as well, basically. But then you get to a stage where you're giving them a 20-yard skip full of aluminium cans and stuff, and you think, blimey, this is nice and easy for them, and they're just going to bail it up and flog it on. And
well, it's to do with the contract you have with your waste management contractor. You need to ask them the right questions. You need to be challenging them to give you stuff back.
The trouble is in many of these locations around the country, you don't have an awful lot of choice. You're generally dealing with the facility that's nearest to the event or one of the facilities in the area. And I mean, I know that, you know, with the Olympics, you had one dedicated facility, massive operation, but
it is no doubt. There is no doubt. It is about what local facilities are available. And if you are in the middle of nowhere with no waste management contractor, you can source locally, that can do the work locally because they haven't got a suitable facility, then it's going to be that much more difficult. But where you can, and you need to look widely at the available waste contractors, because we all have, none of us actually operate nationally. We all have strengths in particular geographies. We'll have a good material recycling facility there and an incinerator there, but not necessarily the two together. And so you need to look widely at the available waste management contractors in your area to see what they can do for you. And this issue of rebate, I'll just tell you how our company has changed. In this last 18 months, we've moved from having salesmen to having buyers. We now buy materials from our customers, because that's how much this industry's changed. We don't sell waste management services. I mean, we do still, you know, but we're now recognising that all these materials have real value.
And do you find that it changes quite drastically the market for the recyclables? Like at one point, is there actually absolutely no demand for something, and then a huge demand?
Not really.
You don't end up with
really.
stock?
It has happened. We had, I can't remember, it was 3 or 4 years ago, a horrible collapse in the market. It has happened, there's no doubt. You know, it's not a stable market, and our contracts with our clients have to recognise that things can happen to markets. But if it happens to us, it happens to everybody else. But again, you know, how the bigger waste management companies, not just ours, others as well, have changed, is they now have marketing departments for the sale of materials, whether in UK markets or overseas. The whole thing has just fundamentally changed, and we want your materials. Now, if you make a contract with a waste management company to take away your stuff, that's the sort of contract you're going to get. You challenge them.
That's
One of the options.
really good to hear. Sorry.
Sorry, okay. I was just going to say one of the options we looked at after 2009, I think, was getting a baler on site and baling it, and then it's like, then you've got it in a nice compact cube and you can take it where you want, basically, but never happened.
We've experimented with balers in remote locations. On a very large event, size of Glastonbury, you know, maybe 60,000 plus, you are actually collecting enough material to make it worth it, but actually the cost, they're prohibitively expensive to make a mill-sized bale, which is, you know, something that's actually saleable. It's just
scale.
yeah.
And just on the local contractors and who's available, is there any kind of resource or place where festival organisers can go to find out who the local contractors are and what the local facilities are? Is there anything mapped out already?
Not. I can't think of anything.
You can ask me.
Yeah. I can't think of anything which is readily available. But it is about Yellow Pages and the web and
Or the skip lorries that try and crash into you on the way there, but.
It can be a bit of a minefield, especially when you know, the people that you're talking to are trying to sell their product, or they're trying to sell whatever it is their facility does, or whatever equipment they happen to have in their yard.
Yeah.
So it can be very difficult to get the real truth.
And just quickly,
that's why you have to have more than one you're talking to. That's
Yes,
you have to compare.
Yeah, you need to compare. Yeah, lots of options.
Quite a few festivals have started to use the energy from waste facilities. So I'd just like to know what your thoughts are about those, and if it's a sustainable method, and what you think the best way forward is as far as the use of those facilities.
Well, I would just say energy from waste just forms a part of the whole story. There will be some materials that aren't very recyclable or are so contaminated they can't be recycled, and you have to dispose of those. Better than landfill, which does it to energy from waste and create some energy out of it. But energy from waste as a solution in itself is not a solution. It's not an appropriate environmental way of proceeding.
I think we did. I think we had about 8% of ours went to energy to waste, and that was 92 mixed recyclables, which obviously you've still got that contamination in that mixed recyclables, I guess. But 8% went to energy to waste, but they transported to Holland. So it's like, right, so you got, you know, that's.
I mean, the reason that's going on is there's in a lot of parts of Northern Europe they've built too much capacity for burning their waste material. So something that happens more and more these days is they're actually looking for feedstock. So they're buying lots of material from the UK. This stuff called refuse-derived fuel, but that's why that happens. I think the thing to say about energy from waste is it's second from bottom on the waste hierarchy. So you've got don't do it at all. You've got prepare it for reuse. You've got recycling, and then you've got energy from waste and landfill at the bottom. But they're both down there at the bottom together. And the fact is, if you're burning waste materials, you're burning plastics, and you're burning paper products. Ultimately, there's a lot of fossil fuel content in there. So essentially, you're burning fossil fuels, but also there's lots and lots of potentially recyclable material in there. And why not put the effort in to reprocessing that material, to recovering that the enormous amount of embedded energy which you'll get from those products. Just another thing is that energy from waste plants, to simplify it, there are kind of three sorts. You've got incinerators, which happen to generate electricity. You've got power stations, which happen to use waste as a fuel. And then you've got some bespoke waste to energy things. But the term energy from waste was actually a rebranding of the incineration industry. And it really shouldn't be seen as a means to an end. Sorry.
No, that's good. It's very good. It's very good.
Actually, I can't let that pass.
Oh, go on.
Incineration with no energy generation is on a par with landfill. But I don't know if there are any incinerators left which don't generate energy. But to generate energy from a material rather than landfill it is better. It's not on the same level.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
So there's a couple of other questions that I want to get through quickly, and then we'll go to the floor. But one is with regard to reporting and measurement, because there doesn't seem to be a standard, and it looks as though some recycling figures may even be misleading to what the reality is. So what's your experience of that, and how do organisers get the right answer?
By asking the right question.
Which how?
If you say to your contractor, can you tell me how much you recycled? He will tell you what he collected. He won't tell you what happened to it afterwards, because you didn't ask him that. You asked him, what did we recycle? So it's a question now of insisting on the information that you want. So if you want to know how much you recycled, where did you send it, and how much of that was recycled where you sent it, and can we have a detailed report, then if your contractor wants to work with you, he will generate those reports for you, and they should be accurate because you can audit them. But if you just ask the question, how much recycling, you're going to get the simplest answer, which is, well, we collected 53% recyclables.
Yeah, I think one of the problems here it's the auditing, because unfortunately, time and time again, we're coming up against waste management companies who are deliberately misleading us and in fact downright lying, as we've seen in a number of cases in the last few years. And I actually think that the organisers, what I'd like to suggest is that organisers put a bit of money into a pot somewhere and set up some kind of auditing body so that we can really get the truth out of this, because it's particularly in the events industry, and I don't know why it is that waste companies think they can get away with it in the events industry, but there is a great deal of corruption around waste, and we need to have competent people to check this.
We've always thought from day one that we're getting, either expanded figures or what. So we didn't actually deal with the skip company ourselves this year. It was through a waste contractor, but because we're so confident that they're putting it up and not showing us exactly what was happening, basically we got the videos of each lorry to show on the weighbridge to show it was there, and they apparently proved it. So it's a difficult one.
Let me put the situation to you. You want a rebate for the valuable materials. So if we're giving you money back for plastics, we're not going to exaggerate how much we recycle.
That's true. So change at the contractual level.
I think one of the problems is that there are a number of there's a bit of smoke and mirrors where you will send material to a facility and they will say, we sent this material to a facility which recycles 90% of its waste. Now, if most of the throughput to that facility is concrete, then yeah, that's really easily recyclable. They just use it as hardcore. So they can say 90%. Now, that doesn't say anything for the skip load of black bags that you sent from your festival, which is full of sausages and curry and whatever. In fact, it was probably scraped up and sent straight into the landfill site. So these are some of the ways in which waste management companies mislead.
Yeah, and that's
the present company accepted.
Of course. It is a fact, isn't it, that for most facilities, at the Olympics, where I told you we had the Barking facility exclusively for the Olympics, so we were able to report with enormous accuracy because that was the only material coming in. But the normal situation is that we would have many, many customers coming in to a facility, bringing lots of different material streams, and that facility processes materials and generates something out the back end. It isn't actually possible unless you shut the thing down, wait for this festival's waste or anybody else's waste to come in, put that through the process and then shut it off again, and then the next customers, and that's not a factory environment. So there is an element, of course, that if you use a facility with other customers, you're going to get the average output of that facility. But I'll tell you what we're doing now as a matter of course. We have set up for all of our facilities a waste acceptance criteria process. So going back to the point that we buy materials now, when they arrive, we want to make sure that we bought the right thing. So we inspect the materials at the gate before they're tipped, and do they match the waste acceptance criteria that's been agreed? And if they do meet the thing, it goes through the process. If it doesn't go through the process, or we renegotiate. So there is this growth now of better data because there's money involved.
No, that's really refreshing to hear. That's really useful, because that is something that's tangible and auditable. and like I say, one of the things you find, you have this thing called the tipping hall, which is at the foot of one of these machines, and if you get a load of contaminated material from a festival, the guy driving the truck will take one look at it and quite often scrape it up, and he won't even run it through the machinery. So
But
it's
as I
really
say,
good. I'm not saying that happens all the time.
No, but if there's a financial disincentive to give you the wrong numbers, you're not going to do it.
And Holger, do you know what the is there a standard in Germany or across Europe for reporting on waste streams that you're aware of, or is it a similar situation?
There's no standard.
There's no standard there either.
I'm pretty sure that almost all of them, if they're not really interested in it and checking their footprint, and there's no law or rule that you have to have a carbon
Standard
footprint of your event. They just have a local contractor. So our festival, we had a contractor that was local, and somehow in Germany they separate the companies have their cities. So the company that works in Bonn and Cologne doesn't work in Düsseldorf and the Ruhrgebiet, and that's why we weren't able to choose another one that was close to us. So we had to deal with them, and they have their facilities. They're working with etc. etc. So they were free to give us the numbers they chose.
It's perhaps worth seeing whether there's some option for selling your waste in the future.
And actually, we have the rest of our waste that wasn't recycled went to waste to energy plant that's in the city where we are in, and that's one with a very big capacity, as Ed said. Maybe you remember the waste in Naples that the mafia didn't take away. It was burned in my city.
Brilliant. Excellent. So on that, if anybody has got any questions, well, just wait for the microphone.
Hi, is that working?
Yeah, it is.
I was just wondering about the food waste, because obviously at the moment there's no waste management company is separating out usable food waste from compostable waste, and I'm assuming you get there's a financial incentive for providing compost. Would you get money for compost? Would you?
It's negligible, to be honest. But the value of compost is not significant in the process.
So what I really wanted to know is, as a festival organiser or a consultant or a waste management company, how can you see it working, separating out the usable food waste, other than it is the most ethical thing you can do with that waste. So if a festival organiser cares, then that's what they want to do. But just any tips on the systems and how you can see that working?
Are you referring to using unused food, and putting it back into?
Did you miss our talk at the beginning?
I did.
Oh, okay. So we are a charity that takes usable food waste and gives it to vulnerable people, and we've done that from some festivals so far.
Okay. My own view on that is you have a far greater chance of success of reusing food in that way for a continual stream of material, so from the back of stores or the back of manufacturers and so on. It takes a bit of you may have discussed this morning, and I missed the conversation, but it takes a bit of a structure, doesn't it, to get something out of an event and into the market when it's a very short event. It's a bit of an issue, and we don't actually get asked to make food from short-term events reusable.
There is something I want to mention about the trader engagement and education of traders as well. NCAS, NCASS, are offering sustainability courses for traders specifically, and they might also be a good organisation who have communication with all of the traders for the UK anyway, to help let them know about what you're doing and perhaps arrange some kind of systems. Obviously it needs to be arranged with the organisers as well, whatever's minimum disruption to their event, it's obviously going to be your best option. But I'd recommend speaking to NCAS for that.
Thank you. I've got a question for the panel. My name's Alison Thomas. I work for Zero Waste Events Cwmheri. My dilemma is how to find an IVC compared with an AD. And personally, I think all of this movement towards compostable materials is a right pain, really, because we're all moving to AD. There are very few IVCs available in where I live, up in mid Wales.
Just AD is anaerobic digestion, and IVC is
in-vessel compost.
So AD can only take food, would only take food, and IVC, as Marek said, actually don't want a greater proportion of compostable waste compared with food waste.
Packaging.
It's the packaging,
It's
yeah.
the packaging.
It's the AD facilities find it hard to deal with high proportions of packaging.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Compostable.
So do IVC if the proportion's too high?
Yeah, if the proportion's too high, yes, yeah. And the other problem that you have with the IVCs, in-vessel composters, is that they must have a shredder to shred the packaging before it can go in. And with the best will in the world, you might find one on the list of facilities, but they may not have a shredder, so that's a question to ask.
But is anybody pressurising the companies who are producing all this compostable material, all these compostable consumables, to say actually they're not, that's not the road we should be going down? We should be using reusable or plastic.
Yes, well, there is an argument now that the problem with using plastic packaging is the fact that it becomes food contaminated. And one of the last things you want in the plastic recycling stream is food, especially oily products. So the reason for the strategy that includes collecting a compostable fraction is all about food contaminated packaging. And yes, you're right. There's a major lack of facilities in the UK.
And they're going to get less, aren't they? Because the whole industry is going to move to AD with a depackaging plant, I imagine.
No. There's AD has been high on the agenda because of the subsidies the government's prepared to pay for the energy generated out of them. But there isn't a massive drive towards AD rather than IVC. Our company, for example, is building IVCs, not building ADs at the moment. It made a lot of noise, and there are more AD plants coming, and quite rightly so. But it's not biased towards them, I don't think.
It's good to know. Thank you.
I think we've got time for one more question. Katie?
It's all right, I'm doing about it. Katie from Bestival. I just wondered what the panel's opinion was on reward schemes with punters. So you bring us a bag of recycling or rubbish and we give you a cup of tea or a drink can of beer or whatever. But what are your opinions on that? Does it work, and what's the best structure that you've come across?
In Germany, for example, we have a waste deposit system for the campsite. So you buy a ticket for 120 euros, and there's 5 euros deposit. If you check in, you get a waste bag that you will bring back, and then get the 5 euros back, and it works perfectly. And I don't know any German festival that's not working that way, and it's like that for 5 or 6 years now. So I would really recommend doing that. It's not really a reward scheme, but it's they give you money and they want it back. So in the end, they bring. Of course, it's unselected, pre-selected. They just fill the bag and hand it over to you, but it makes the cleaning process easier.
Just quickly, we piloted for the first year for us at Shambhala last year a waste deposit system. We charged £10 on top of each ticket purchase. The public brought back 2 bags, or they were meant to bring back 2 bags, recycling rubbish, and we gave them a tenner back. And the audience surveys post-event suggested that 96% of our audience thought it was a good idea and supported it, which was fantastic. We also achieved 40% less waste left in the campsite post-event, pushed our recycling rates up. So our experience of it has been very positive.
So we should get a case study. Okay, well, I've got millions more questions, but we do actually have to stop for lunch now, and that's been a really informative and brilliant session. If anyone does have questions, you can send them in to us, and we're going to create an FAQ through a Greener Festival, so by all means get in touch. Thank you to the panel.